Welcome to Exegetical Tools Basic Greek Videos. In this video we're going to look at cases, that is the Greek case system. Cases are used for nouns in order to signal different functions for words in sentences. So many languages do have cases. English only has a few cases left, such as in the personal pronouns, where we might say him when him is an object rather than he, which would be the subject. That's the difference between the nominative and the accusative case. So it's somewhat difficult at first for English speakers to get a grasp on cases, but basically if you see a noun in a certain case, that case is going to tell you how the noun is functioning in a sentence. So it's important to understand the cases before you go on to learning things like nouns and how they decline and how they look differently, like first and second declension nouns and third declension nouns, because you need to know what the cases are before you can do that. So in Greek there are 5 cases, and just briefly, as you can see here, these are the nominative, the accusative, the genitive, the dative, and the vocative. Older grammarians tended to teach that there were 8 cases in Greek, and they would actually say that the dative, what we now call the dative, was actually 3 different cases that all had the same endings, and that the genitive was 2 different cases that had the same endings. But that's not really, grammarians who were doing that were more under the influence of languages outside of Greek, such as Latin, rather than the actual Greek language. So nowadays we teach there are 5 cases in Greek because that's what the actual language has. It's just that those cases are a little more flexible than the older grammarians thought they were. They had to divide them into 2 or 3 different cases because they're a little broader in their function, as we'll see. So the nominative case, this is what we might call the naming case, and nominatives typically function as the subjects of sentences. And they can also function as predicate nominatives, and if you're not sure what that is, that means you have a nominative that's showing up in the predicate of a sentence. So here we have, for example, in English, John is a man. John is the subject, and that would be in the nominative case in Greek. Is the to be verb, and then the predicate comes after that. The predicate here is a man. Now in Greek, a man in this case would actually be translated, it would be shown up in the nominative case. So this noun would be in the noun, and that's because it's a predicate nominative. It would not show up in the accusative case because it's not the direct object of a verb, it's just a predicate nominative. So that's what a predicate nominative is, but typically the main rule here is that nominative is the subject of the sentence, especially for those of you who are just beginning Greek. There's an example here we have in John 1:1. We have hologos, ein, proston theon, but now hologos is in the nominative case, and that's functioning as the subject of the sentence. Ein means was, so we have the word was, and then proston theon, with God. But the point here is that hologos is in the nominative case, and it's the subject of the sentence. So nominative, that's pretty simple, and there are a few other advanced uses of the nominative, and that holds for all of these cases. And if you were to go, for example, into Wallace's Greek Grammar Beyond the Basics or any other intermediate grammar of that sort, you would be able to find a lot of different categories of usage for each of these cases. Right now I'm just going to give you the basic cases and then maybe 1 or 2 other kind of uses, just so you can be aware that there are other uses out there. The accusative case. This is more of the objective case. So if you have a direct object of a verb, it's typically going to be in the accusative case. There are some verbs that for whatever reason take their direct object in, say, the genitive case or the dative case, but those are just strange verbs, and you have to look that up in the lexicon, which is what we call a Greek dictionary, in order to see that. So by default, the direct object is typically the accusative case. So these are direct objects of verbs. They can also be the objects of prepositions if the preposition likes to take the accusative case after it. An example would be pros. Pros means to or toward, or in this case with in John 1:1, and it's sometimes followed by the accusative. Now prepositions can also be followed by the genitive or dative, so that holds true for for all three of these cases. Now in John 1:1, here's an example. Again, we have hologos, the word was, and then pros ton theon. Now there's the accusative following a preposition. But in John 1:14, we have an actual direct object. We have the verb for we beheld, and then tein doxon, which is in the accusative case, autou, meaning of him. And this means we beheld the glory of him. Notice that the glory, tein doxon, is the direct object of the verb, and so it shows up in the accusative case. Sorry, this is getting a little messy. Now, one other use of the accusative case that you might find is that two accusatives can stand together in a sentence, and one would be the direct object and the other would be an object complement. An example is in Matthew 22:43, where you have how therefore can David in the Spirit or by the Spirit, how is it that David is by the Spirit is calling him auton? Auton means him, and it's in the accusative case. And then kurion means Lord, and that's in the accusative case. So here we have what you might at first glance think are two direct objects, but in fact, this is the same kind of construction we have in English. It's called an object complement construction. So if you look up here, it says, I painted the wall red. Wall is the direct object, and red is the object complement. It's a complement that's telling you something about the direct object. You painted the wall to be red, is what you're really saying. And so in Greek, we have the same construction. How is it that, how then does David in the Spirit call him Lord? Him is the direct object, Lord is the object complement. There are other uses of the accusative, as I said, which you can look up in Wallace, but for now this will suffice. The genitive case. The genitive case is, you might say, the of case. Nouns in the genitive case function to express relationships to other nouns, such as possession, source, and separation. So you'll very often, just the typical default translation is the word of in front of the noun. So let's look at the example sentence to kind of illustrate this. You have hezoe in the nominative case, meaning life, ein meaning was, taphos meaning the light, and then ton anthropon, which means it's from anthropos, which means man. It's in the genitive case and it's plural. This own ending, which you'll eventually learn, it signals the genitive plural. And so we have, you would translate this of men. The life was the light of men. So basically you take the noun, whatever the noun is, in this case anthropon, which means man, anthropos means man, and because it's in the genitive case, you will translate it of men. So you put the of in front of the meaning of the noun. And then we end up with this resultant translation, the life was the light of men. The genitive noun, ton anthropon, in this case, may be translated of men. You could also use the apostrophe s construction if the genitive is signaling possession. So, but by default, it's always best to just go ahead and translate it using of, because sometimes you'll get 2, 3, maybe even 4 genitives in a row, and so in that case, you just want to use the of translation on at least on the first go, so that you can see the whole sentence. And then if you want to kind of smooth out the translation by using the apostrophe s, then you can do that. For example, in this you might say, the life was men's light. But in that case, that's a bit of a rough translation, and it doesn't really sound that great in English, so the life was the light of men actually sounds better, so you would leave it using of. Now the dative case functions to express relationships to other nouns or verbs such as location, instrumentality, or indirect object of a verb. So for example, in John 1:5, we have the light, in teskotia, meaning in the darkness, is shining. And in this case, the preposition en right here is functioning to state more clearly what that dative case is trying to tell us. So when en shows up in front of the dative case, it usually means something like in or into. And so we have the light is shining in the darkness. So in this case, the dative case is telling us the location of the shining. The shining is occurring in the darkness. It can also function as the indirect object of a verb. So in English, if you had he threw the ball to her, then the direct object would be the ball, that's what he threw, and he threw it to her, so that's the indirect object. The indirect object would be represented in the Greek by the dative case. The fifth and last case in Greek is called the vocative. The vocative case is the case that signals direct address. In English, we would signal this with the word O, which you would see not with the H. It would just be O, like O Lord, or O God, or something like that. Maybe you start a prayer like that, O Lord, and you continue on. Some examples. One example here would be Matthew 8:25, and you can see here, Kyrie, which means Lord, save, we are perishing. The noun Kyrie here is in the vocative case, signaling the direct address of the Lord. Now, these first four cases are the cases whose endings and forms you're actually going to have to memorize. The vocative case is a little more rare, and you actually don't need to memorize the forms of the vocative because it's actually going to be, for the most part, recognizable from context. And I'll show you here in our vocative handout what exactly I mean. I'll just clear this a little. Now, as I said, you'll usually recognize it from context, but there are some rules to learn. For example, you don't know what you may not know what the actual endings and forms are yet, so I'm just going to show you some examples. Adelphoi can be either the subject, meaning brothers, like the brothers are going to the store, or it can mean brothers in the vocative. So it has the same form. When vocatives are plural, the form is the same as the nominative plural. And then, so you probably don't understand this yet, but just know that the vocative shares the same form with a lot of different forms. So Adelphe can mean either sister as a subject, or it can mean sister as a vocative. And then there are a couple other ones that are slightly different, like apostele, which is similar to that Kyrie you just saw, and pater. Those are a little different, but for the most part, it's not very difficult to understand. There are some exceptions to these rules, but they're rare. If you're more interested in the vocative and learning more about it, see a textbook like Wallace and look up the chapter on vocatives. Now, when I did a search on vocatives using BibleWorks 8, I found that there were 564 nouns in the vocative, and for some reason here I have preposition. It should be participle. It showed up one time as a participle in the vocative, 24 times as an adjective, and 564 times as a noun. So that's only around 590 times as a vocative. For some reason Wallace says it's only 292, but I don't think he lists where he got that number from, so I couldn't figure out how he got that number and why it was different from mine. My search was with BibleWorks 8. In any case, it's somewhere between around 300 to 600 uses of the vocative in the New Testament, which is not really that many. And most of them you'll understand from context. So look at the examples. Matthew 8:25, Kyrie. We already saw this one. Lord, save. We are perishing. There's also Luke 10:21, which says, I give thanks to you, Pater, Kyrie, Father, Lord of heaven and of earth. And then in Acts 7:2, we actually get three vocatives right in a row. This is the beginning of an address. Men, adelphoi, brothers, kai pateres, and fathers, listen. So there's three in one verse, which is a pretty unique use of the vocative. Now, as I said, you don't need to memorize the forms of the vocative, so when you move on to learning the forms of first, second, and third declension nouns, you will not be learning the vocative case, but you do need to know about the vocative case and that it exists. So those are the 5 cases in Greek. Remember, a basic review to put in the most basic terms: the nominative is the naming case and usually signals the subject. The accusative is the objective case and usually signals a direct object. The genitive case signals relations such as possession, source, or separation. And the dative case usually signals location, instrumentality, or indirect object. And lastly, the vocative signals direct address. These are the 5 cases in Greek. Please keep these in mind. You need to understand what these are and how they function before you move on to learning about nouns in Greek and the first through third declension nouns, to which videos you could now go on to if you'd like. Thanks for coming here. I hope this was helpful. See you next video.